The shovel struck something undeniably solid, a dull, sickening thud echoing in the frigid night air. I froze, my breath pluming, heart hammering against my ribs, just inches beneath the thawing soil, where only weeks ago a freshly dug mound had disturbed the pristine snow, lay a resistance that felt unnatural. My gloved fingers, still stinging from the cold seeping through the fabric, had brushed against a surface too smooth, too resilient to be rock, too vast to be mere debris. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ground, a vibration that resonated not in my hands, but deep within my bones. From the dark, unlit window of the house just yards away, I felt eyes on me, a presence I couldn't see, but knew was there. A prickle of ice slithered down my spine, far colder than the winter air. This wasn't just a neighbor's secret anymore. This was a revelation, and I was about to unearth it. It all started last winter, a season that had arrived with a vengeance, blanketing our small, quiet cul-de-sac in an unusually thick layer of snow. I've lived in this house for 15 years, long enough to know every crack in the pavement, every tree's shadow, and every neighbor's routine. Or so I thought. Then the house next door, which had stood empty for a year after old Mrs. Gable passed, sold. A few weeks later, a moving truck arrived, not with the usual flurry of activity, but with a single hulking figure who worked mostly in silence, often under the cover of dusk. This was Arthur Kessel. Arthur wasn't particularly friendly, nor was he overtly hostile. He was simply there, a man of imposing height and girth with a perpetually unreadable expression. He drove an older model pickup truck, always meticulously clean, and seemed to prefer the solitude of his newly acquired property. Our only interaction was a brief, awkward nod across our driveways, or a mumbled morning if we happened to be getting our mail at the same time. He kept to himself, which in our neighborhood was unusual but not unheard of. Some people just prefer their privacy. I tried to apply this logic to the first odd thing I noticed. It was mid-January, the ground frozen solid, the kind of winter where the air felt like it could shatter glass. I was up late, as usual, working on a script. I'm a freelance writer, and my hours are often dictated by the muse, or more accurately, by looming deadlines. My home office overlooks Arthur's backyard. Around 2 a.m., a sliver of light from his kitchen window pierced the darkness. I thought nothing of it until I saw him, out in his backyard, a figure silhouetted against the faint glow, engaged in what looked like heavy labor. He was digging, in the middle of winter, in the hard, unforgiving earth. My first thought was a burst pipe, perhaps, or some other emergency, but there was no frantic energy, just a methodical, almost ritualistic movement. He didn't have a bright floodlight on, just a single portable work lamp casting a confined pool of yellow light. He worked for hours, until the pre-dawn sky began to lighten, leaving behind a freshly disturbed patch of earth, a dark, raw scar against the otherwise pristine snow. The next morning, the fresh earth had been covered with a tarp, almost haphazardly, but effectively obscuring whatever he had been digging. The snow continued to fall, eventually blanketing the entire area, and for a while, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was laying a foundation for a shed, but why in the dead of winter? Why in the middle of the night? And why the secrecy? He wasn't using any heavy machinery, just a shovel and what looked like a pickaxe. The sheer physical effort required to dig a substantial hole in frozen ground with hand tools was staggering. This was my first real brush with the unsettling truth that something was not right with my new neighbor. I remember telling myself it was just an oddity, a quirk. We all have them, right? Maybe he was a night owl, preferred working in the cold. It was an initial element of ambiguity, a tiny seed of doubt I planted in my mind to avoid facing the uncomfortable question of what he might actually be doing. As the weeks crawled by, the snow gradually melted, revealing the lingering mound of earth, now covered with grass seed, which seemed out of place given the still frigid temperatures. It looked like a fresh grave, a very, very large grave. The size of the mound really got to me. It wasn't just a small patch for a garden gnome. This was substantial. It was large enough that I found myself subconsciously averting my eyes whenever I looked out my window. The grass seed, of course, didn't take. It just sat there, brown and lifeless, an ugly crust on an even uglier secret. This particular winter felt exceptionally long, dragging on with a persistent chill that seeped into everything, including my thoughts about Arthur and his backyard project. I noticed he never had visitors, never received packages that weren't standard mail, and rarely left his property for more than a quick grocery run. He was a ghost in plain sight. One afternoon, I was out clearing some branches that had fallen during a late-season storm, a grounding detail that helped me feel normal again, engaging in mundane yard work. Arthur was in his backyard, tending to the forlorn patch of earth. He wasn't digging, but rather meticulously raking over the surface, almost caressing it. He had a strange intensity in his movements, focusing on that specific spot with an almost obsessive care that seemed disproportionate to a patch of failed grass. As he bent over, I noticed something glinting in the newly exposed soil where the snow had pulled back. It was small, metallic, and quickly covered by his next rake stroke. A flicker of something that didn't belong. This was my first true foreshadowing detail, a small, inconsequential glint that would later feel like a scream. I paused, saw him glance up, and quickly went back to my branch clearing. He didn't seem to notice me, or if he did, he gave no indication. The incident reignited the dormant suspicion within me. The mound remained a constant presence, a silent testament to that frigid January night. Every time I looked out, my eyes were drawn to it. It became a focal point of my anxiety. Was it a pet? A very large pet? He didn't seem like the pet-owning type. Plus, who buries a pet in the dead of winter by hand under such secretive conditions? No, this was different. This was something else. A knot began to form in my stomach, growing tighter with each passing day. The very air around his house seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken weight. I started to notice small things about his house that I hadn't before. The windows, always impeccably clean, were often devoid of movement, like vacant eyes staring out into nothing. He kept his curtains drawn during the day, which again was unusual for our neighborhood, where most houses were bathed in natural light. It wasn't a critical piece of information at this point, just another thread in the tapestry of his strangeness. It was the kind of detail that retrospectively makes the skin crawl. Spring finally arrived, hesitantly at first, then with its usual vibrant burst. The snow melted completely, revealing the full extent of the disturbed ground. It was indeed a large area, roughly 6 feet by 3 feet, though significantly deeper than any average grave. The patch of earth still refused to grow anything, the soil looking oddly compacted and barren. Arthur continued to fuss over it, occasionally adding more grass seed, which would invariably fail to sprout. He even fashioned a small, makeshift fence around it, ostensibly to keep animals out, but it only served to draw more attention to the spot. It was a barrier, not just for animals, but for prying eyes, for my eyes, and for the rising tides of dread that were beginning to swamp my peace of mind. I started avoiding my office, finding myself making excuses to work from the living room, anything to avoid the direct line of sight to that ominous patch of earth. But the mental image, the question, the fear archives of my own growing suspicions remained. What had my neighbor truly buried in his backyard last winter? The question resonated with an increasingly sinister echo in the quiet of my home. The fear, once a whisper, was starting to find its voice. The question of what Arthur Kessel had buried became less of a fleeting curiosity and more of an insistent, gnawing presence. It wormed its way into my thoughts during the day and seeped into my dreams at night. I found myself becoming a reluctant, almost unwilling detective. My routine walks around the neighborhood started to include an extra, lingering glance towards Arthur's property. I'd pretend to be checking my mailbox or watering my plants, all while subtly observing. He really was a solitary figure. No friends, no family, no deliveries of anything beyond the occasional utility bill. It was as if he'd materialized out of thin air, with no past and no connections. His entire existence centered around that quiet, meticulously maintained house and that single, disturbing patch of ground. One breezy afternoon in late spring, a strong gust of wind ripped through the neighborhood. I was in my yard, securing some loose patio furniture. As I worked, I noticed something else had been dislodged by the wind. The makeshift fence Arthur had erected around the burial site had partially collapsed, and a corner of the tarp he had used way back in January, hidden beneath layers of failed grass seed and earth, had been exposed. It was a dark blue, heavy-duty tarp, the kind used for construction or covering large objects. My heart gave a little lurch. This was my chance. I tried to dismiss the thought, to tell myself it wasn't my business, but the pull was too strong. The image of Arthur digging in the frozen earth, the sheer size of the mound, and now this glimpse of the tarp, it fueled an almost unbearable urge to know. This was a critical piece of information. This was a window into his secret. I waited until nightfall. A sliver of moon offered minimal light, but it was enough. I pulled on dark clothing, a pair of gloves, and grabbed a small flashlight, feeling utterly ridiculous and utterly compelled. My palms were sweating, a cold, clammy sensation that had nothing to do with the night air. Crossing the property line felt like stepping into another dimension, a place where the familiar rules of neighborly etiquette ceased to apply. Every rustle of leaves, every distant dog bark made me jump. I edged towards the fence, careful not to make a sound. The collapsed section offered an easy entry. The air near the mound felt different, heavy and still, despite the light breeze. I knelt beside the exposed tarp, my flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust. I could feel the rough texture of the fabric beneath my fingertips. It was thick, stiff, and seemed to cling to the earth. Taking a deep breath, I tried to gently lift the edge. It was stuck fast, not just buried, but almost fused with the surrounding soil. I tugged harder, and with a soft, tearing sound, a small section of the tarp came free. My flashlight beam, tiny and focused, cut through the darkness. Beneath the tarp, the soil wasn't just soil. It was different, darker, almost greasy. A faint, almost imperceptible odor rose from it, a smell I couldn't quite place, but one that stirred a deep, primal revulsion. It wasn't the smell of decay, not exactly. It was more like stagnant water mixed with something metallic and vaguely organic, a truly unsettling aroma. I quickly recovered the tarp section, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had seen enough to confirm my suspicions that this was no ordinary backyard project. This was something sinister. The fear archives in my mind were rapidly filling with disturbing data points. The next few weeks were a blur of heightened paranoia. I found myself constantly watching Arthur, scrutinizing his every move. He, in turn, seemed to become subtly more aware of me. Our polite nods grew strained, his gaze holding an unreadable intensity that made me feel like he knew what I suspected, or perhaps knew what I had done. Was it paranoia? Was I imagining the way his eyes lingered a second too long, the way he stopped his yard work when I was visible, only to resume once I was gone? This blurring of perception, this creeping element of ambiguity made everything feel precarious. Maybe I was projecting my guilt onto him, or maybe, just maybe, he truly was aware. This was a crucial piece of information for my mental well-being. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I started researching unexplained burials, true crime stories, anything that might offer a rational explanation, or at least a framework for understanding what I might be dealing with. My computer screen became a window into the darker side of human nature, a chilling exploration of hidden secrets and unspeakable acts. I learned about soil decomposition, the specific odors associated with different stages, the way graves could be disguised. One grounding detail I stumbled upon mentioned that some perpetrators attempt to replant foliage over burial sites to hasten decomposition and obscure the ground, but that it often fails due to soil disruption and nutrient imbalance. Arthur's continuously barren patch of earth fit the description perfectly. It was a detail that added a chilling layer of plausibility to my growing dread. One evening, I saw Arthur working late again, near the mound. This time he wasn't raking or adding seed. He was pouring something onto the earth from a large, unmarked plastic container. The liquid was dark, almost viscous, reflecting the moonlight with an oily sheen. The air immediately filled with a sharp, acrid chemical smell that even reached my yard. It was potent, burning the back of my throat. He worked quickly, almost furtively, pouring the liquid in a precise pattern before retreating back into his house, leaving the noxious fumes to dissipate slowly into the night. It felt like he was trying to accelerate something, or perhaps erase something. This act was a serious escalation, a new, alarming piece of the puzzle. What chemical could he be using, and what was its purpose in a backyard? The smell lingered for days, a faint, metallic tang on the breeze. It was the smell of desperation, of a secret being actively guarded. I couldn't sleep. The mound had become an obsession, a black hole of unanswered questions that threatened to consume me. I knew then that I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't just watch. I needed to know what Arthur Kessel had buried. The question was no longer a matter of idle curiosity. It was a desperate plea from my own conscience. I had to confront this, one way or another. We're about to go deeper into this, and the story only gets darker from here. If you're enjoying this account and want to support the channel, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to it. My plan formed slowly, born out of a desperate need for answers. I would have to dig. Not just lift a tarp corner, but actually dig. I knew it was dangerous, reckless even, but the alternative, living with the gnawing uncertainty, the terrifying possibilities, was far worse. I would wait for the perfect opportunity, a night when Arthur was undeniably away, or when conditions were such that my actions would be obscured. The audacity of the idea terrified me, but a deeper, more primal fear was pushing me forward. This wasn't just about my neighbor anymore. This was about my peace of mind, about the truth, and about the horrible, unsettling thought that my quiet cul-de-sac might be harboring a secret far more gruesome than anyone could imagine. The fear archives were screaming. The opportunity finally presented itself on a sweltering summer night, a few weeks after the chemical incident. Arthur had left in his pickup truck, something he rarely did after dark, and I watched his brake lights disappear down the road, a chilling sense of determined calm washing over me. This was it. The air was thick and humid, the kind of night where every sound seemed magnified, every shadow deepened. I waited a full hour, just to be sure he wouldn't turn back before making my move. Armed with a sturdy shovel, a headlamp, and a growing sense of dread, I slipped through my backyard and into his. The moon was a sliver, offering little light, but the humidity held the scent of freshly cut grass, a stark contrast to the task at hand. Approaching the mound, I could still detect the faintest hint of that acrid chemical smell, now mixed with the rich, earthy scent of disturbed soil. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I focused on the task, trying to compartmentalize the fear, pushing it down, telling myself I just needed to look to confirm. The shovel bit into the soft, barren earth with surprising ease at first, then encountered the resistance of the compacted soil beneath. Every scrape and thud felt deafening in the still night. I started near the edge of the mound, slowly widening my excavation. The soil was a dark, almost black color, unlike the lighter, healthier earth in my own yard. It felt dense, strangely heavy. After about 15 minutes of strenuous digging, the shovel struck something undeniably solid. A dull, sickening thud echoed in the frigid night air. I froze, my breath pluming, heart hammering against my ribs. Just inches beneath the thawing soil, where only weeks ago a freshly dug mound had disturbed the pristine snow, lay a resistance that felt unnatural. My gloved fingers, still stinging from the cold seeping through the fabric, had brushed against a surface too smooth, too resilient to be rock, too vast to be mere debris. This was it. This was the moment I had both longed for and dreaded. I pushed the shovel in again, carefully trying to dislodge the earth around the object. The surface was hard, unyielding, and slightly curved. I scraped away more soil, revealing more of the surface. It was large, far too large to be a pet. My hands trembled as I cleared away more of the dark earth, the headlamp illuminating a slick, almost rubbery texture. It was dark, a deep, unsettling shade of purplish black, and then the smell intensified. That faint, metallic, organic odor I detected weeks ago was now overwhelming, a gag-inducing stench that filled my nostrils and coated the back of my throat. It was the smell of decay, yes, but not like an animal. It was something else, something I couldn't rationally identify but instinctively recoiled from. A wave of nausea washed over me. I coughed, trying to clear my throat, my eyes watering from the fumes. This was what the chemical was for. This was why the ground wouldn't grow anything. This was a burial site. As I exposed more of the object, its shape became clearer. It was cylindrical, uncomfortably long. The surface was not smooth but ridged, almost like a grotesque, oversized cocoon. It was wrapped. It was carefully, meticulously wrapped in what looked like heavy-duty plastic sheeting, secured with industrial-strength tape. The plastic itself was stained and discolored, adhering to whatever was beneath it like a second skin. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the horrifying visual. This wasn't a body in a shallow grave. This was something deliberately, expertly concealed. This was a secret engineered to stay buried. My hands, still shaking, explored the edges of the wrapped object. It was massive, extending far beyond the scope of my current excavation. It felt like a bizarre, monstrous package. And then through a tear in the plastic near what felt like one end, I saw it. A glimpse of something pale, something disturbingly familiar but utterly out of place. It was a foot, a human foot. Not a skeleton, not just bones, but a preserved, mummified-looking appendage, shriveled and discolored, yet undeniably recognizable. The skin was leathery, the toenails dark and brittle. It was attached to something. The realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't merely a body. This was a meticulously preserved, carefully packaged corpse, or parts of one. I stumbled back, gasping, the shovel clattering to the ground. The headlamp beam shook wildly, illuminating the horror I had unearthed, then sweeping across the dark, silent house. My breath hitched. From the dark, unlit window of Arthur's house, I felt eyes on me, a presence I couldn't see, but knew was there. A prickle of ice slithered down my spine, far colder than the winter air. This wasn't just a neighbor's secret anymore. This was a revelation, and I was in the middle of it. The faint tremor I'd felt earlier, it returned, not from the ground, but from within the house, a subtle vibration that hinted at movement. A light click, almost imperceptible, echoed from the back door. Arthur was home. Panic seized me, sharp and cold. I scrambled, desperately trying to cover the exposed foot, to push the earth back, to erase my discovery. But it was too late. The light from his kitchen window flashed on, illuminating the backyard with a harsh, unforgiving glow. Arthur stood in the doorway, a towering silhouette against the brightness, utterly still. He didn't move towards me, didn't shout. He just watched, his posture radiating a silent, terrifying certainty. His gaze was fixed on me, then slowly, deliberately, drifted down to the disturbed mound, to the exposed foot. There was no surprise in his eyes, no anger, just a profound, unsettling understanding. I didn't wait for him to move. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I scrambled over the half-collapsed fence, tearing my pants, scraping my leg, but barely registering the pain. I didn't look back. I sprinted across my own yard, fumbling with my back door, locking it, then locking every door and window in my house. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. The image of that foot burned into my mind. The smell of decay, the unnatural wrapping, Arthur's silent, knowing gaze. It was all real. The fear archives now held a horrifying, undeniable truth. The police came, eventually. My frantic, incoherent 911 call about a body in my neighbor's backyard, about a man watching me from his window, was finally taken seriously after what felt like an eternity. They investigated. They dug. They found it. Or rather, they found what appeared to be it. The police report, a cold, clinical document, stated that they had indeed found a large, professionally wrapped package containing human remains, severely decomposed but identifiable through DNA as a missing person from a neighboring state. A grim, terrifying confirmation. But then the report took a strange turn. It mentioned finding multiple similar packages, one containing what appeared to be animal remains, another a collection of ancient bones that forensic anthropologists identified as belonging to no known species, and a third, unsettlingly empty but perfectly formed, human-sized wrap of plastic and tape. They arrested Arthur Kessel. He offered no resistance, no explanation, no words at all. He just went with them, his stoic expression unchanged. The neighborhood was in an uproar, swarming with police and reporters. The house was sealed, declared a crime scene, then eventually sold to new owners who completely renovated it. But the mound, it was excavated, yes, but the deeper mysteries remained. What was the purpose of the other packages? What did the empty one signify? The official story became that Arthur was a serial killer, a meticulously careful one who buried his victims in various stages of preservation, perhaps for some macabre collection or ritual. But the true story, the one that I knew, felt far more complex, far more chilling. The fear archives of my mind replay that night constantly. The image of that foot, the smell, Arthur's silent gaze. I still live in my house, but I can never look at the neighbor's property the same way. The ground there feels cursed, tainted. I see the new family, a young couple with children, playing in the backyard, oblivious to what lies or once lay beneath their swing set. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still catch a faint whiff of that acrid, metallic smell. And I wonder, with a cold dread that settles deep in my bones, if Arthur Kessel was just a man with a horrifying secret, or if he was merely the archivist, carefully curating a collection of fear, preparing the ground for something even more ancient and unspeakable. The truth, I fear, is still out there, buried somewhere, waiting to be unearthed again. Unsettling wind down. The quiet of the nights here is different now. It's not peaceful. It's pregnant with absence, with unspoken possibilities. I find myself staring out my window, not at anything in particular, but into the darkness, searching for a shadow that isn't there, listening for a sound that could just be the wind or something else entirely. Sleep is a fragile thing, often fractured by vivid, almost tactile memories of that foot, that smell, the profound stillness in Arthur's eyes. They say he's in a high-security facility, still silent, still uncooperative. But sometimes a chilling thought surfaces. What if he wasn't just burying the dead? What if he was cultivating something, preserving something? The true extent of his madness, or perhaps his purpose, remains a terrifying void. I'm left with the weight of that knowledge, the horrifying understanding that the thin veneer of normalcy can be ripped away in a single, freezing night, revealing the monstrous depths beneath. This cul-de-sac, once a haven, is now a constant reminder of the secrets the earth can hold and the unspeakable things that walk among us. If you've ever had an experience that made you question the very ground you stand on, or the quiet intentions of those around you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all just trying to make sense of the things that lurk in the shadows, aren't we? Just be careful what you dig up.